The idea is by doing it in a commercially viable way and doing it at small scale, we're going to be the first ones that can then go make the larger stuff. Like the right way to do this isn't to like, ask NASA for $200 million to go make a module and then like figure out what you're going to do with it once it's up there. Like the right step is start things sort of step by step, set up the supply chain. We're going to make sure that we actually have customers that want to buy this stuff. And then as people have more demand for our product, then we start to scale it up. And it's a much more sort of consistent and commercially viable approach than just like relying on sort of government funding to basically, pay for a space station.
Hey everyone, you've heard of SpaceX, you've heard of space flights, but today we're going to talk about space manufacturing. We have Dalian here to talk about his company Varga and why space manufacturing is the new future of manufacturing. He's also going to give us some insights on getting into the tech industry, goals to achieve, and what to look at for early on in your career. So let's take a look at that. I feel like that same logic can be applied to, say, a kid in the bedroom wanting to start a startup. Maybe they're looking for that big investor that's like going to take them all the way to the top. They don't have to get a job, but maybe it's better if they just, take it step by step. They don't have, maybe the most up-to-date technologies. They just use the stack that they're knowledgeable with and build it up from there.
Yeah, I'd say I think one of the core differentiators of the most successful people in Silicon Valley is being willing to think in like super long time frames, right? And while it might be in the short term attractive to be like, hey, NASA, we'd like to apply for a $100 million grant and we'd like to, get some funding for us to make like a space station module. In the long term, that's unlikely going to be the one that like succeeds because again, you need to do this sort of step by step. And the same thing applies, like you said, for careers, where it's like a lot of times I feel like people are like, oh, I want to become a VC or I want to become a startup founder, but they're like sort of rushing into the end game when like what they should instead spend time doing is like build up a network, build up some skill sets, start to get to know investors, start to think about the ideas, get to know the industry that you would actually want to operate in, start to think about what would be the startup that you would actually want to do. And then finally, when it's like so itching and burning in your head, like, oh, you're like, I know exactly the problem. I know exactly who would fund it. Then you say, oh, I'm going to start a startup. Versus I think a lot of people sort of try to do in reverse. They're like, I'm going to start a startup and then I'm going to get my investor and then I'll figure out what the hell I'm doing. Typically, that isn't sort of the best approach. You want to do this sort of step-by-step approach, but that requires a lot of patience and a lot of long-term thinking of like, I've been wanting to start a space company since I was like, in 10th grade. But I had to take this long-term approach. It was like, well, first I got to learn about business. And so I started a different company that was just like taught me about business. And then I was like, okay, well then I got to learn about investing. So I became a VC. And then I was like, okay, well, I got to learn about the space industry before I can start a space company. And so I started investing in some space companies and going to space conferences and meeting other space-like founders. And then finally I was like, okay, now after all of this prep work for the past like decade, basically, now I'm finally ready to basically pull the trigger on this. And because of that, I think it's a sort of, much more likely to succeed than if I tried, 10th grade in high school to be like, I'm going to start a space company and try to like, sell some satellites or something like that.
There's definitely a trend that you seem to surround yourself with people of high intellectual ability or people who like can mentor you or inspire you. Is this something that people coming out of make school or people starting out in the tech industry should look for? And if so, how can they go about doing that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that people under index on in their early career moves is just like focusing on like learning over anything else. Like, I would take a job of like, let's say you don't love financial services, but you have the opportunity to go like work directly for like Max Levchin and be his chief of staff. Like, I don't care if you don't like financial services, you don't find a firm to be that interesting of a company because you're like, whatever, checkout software. Like, you go work for Max at a firm because like you're just going to learn so much more being his chief of staff than like founding a company, like, working at your buddy's startup, like, doing literally almost anything else in life. And so I think people should primarily be prioritizing, especially in their first couple career moves, who are the mentors and who are the people that you're learning from. And it turns out that there's a lot more of those opportunities than you'd expect when you're willing to sacrifice a couple of other factors, which might be like, your ego and the level of responsibilities that you have, the actual salary that you're getting paid, the type of company that you're working at. If you're willing to sort of deprioritize those and then instead strictly prioritize, I want to learn from the smartest people like in the world. It turns out I think those opportunities are much more, frequent. There are plenty of engineers that I met that are sort of fresh out of school that are like stoked to work at Anduril and go like learn from Palmer Luckey. And like, he's now a, second time multi-billion-dollar company founder. And it turns out just most people are like, well, but like, I don't like working at a defense company. It's like, well, do you want to work at a defense company, or do you want to like, learn from one of the smartest people on earth? Like better go learn from one of the smartest people on earth, and like, you'll figure out how to work at a defense company. And so, yeah, I think there's actually a lot more opportunities than people expect when they realize that they're almost certainly going to have to sacrifice other dimensions of what they thought that they would be prioritizing. And then once you hit to, let's say ages, 29, 30, 31, then you can start to swap back and be like, okay, I've learned a lot of what I'm going to learn. I've gotten really great mentorship. Now I'm going to take that skill set and everything that I've learned and go apply it to the thing that I really want to go do, whether it's like a particular industry, type of problem that you want to go solve. But most people sort of start in the wrong direction. They start with like, hey, this is this industry that I'm super passionate about, and I'm going to go do that. I've been passionate about space for a long time. I did not start, like I said, with like straight out of college or high school with like trying to start a space company. I was like, I need to build up all these skill sets, learn from really great people, and then now I use all those lessons that I've learned from Keith, from Peter, et cetera, and I apply those to the world of space. But that is what makes this space company that I'm doing now much more successful than if I just basically, try to start a space company before I'd learned all of those lessons.
And what would you say to a student who maybe yet doesn't have like the clout to get, a top founder or a top CEO as a mentor? What types of things should they be looking in for a mentor, and where can they look for that?
I think what you find surprising is that the bar for that isn't as high as people think. Like at Varda, we are hiring like, fresh grad, seniors with mechanical engineering from, UC Irvine that are just super bright and are really excited to like, work on the problem with us. And so I think, are you going to get like a Peter as an individual mentor? No, but like I haven't had Peter as an individual mentor either, but I've just like worked closely enough to him from a variety of different capacities that I feel like I have gotten to both be mentored, whether it's indirectly through him, but through the people that he has mentored, right? And so don't aim strictly for the Peters, the Keith, the Max Levchins of the world, like, sort of aim one next level down. And those people are almost always willing to basically hire like fresh grads that are super smart and motivated. And so the bar is a lot lower than you'd expect. If just like, go look through, let's say the top 10 VCs and their portfolios and the Series A's that they've done most recently. If you're a fresh grad, engineer, marketer, business person that's excited to go work at one of those companies, they will almost certainly hire you. Like a lot of these companies are really excited to have basically young people that have a ton of energy and are willing to work 14-hour days and make up for their like lack of experience and skill with just like raw grit. Yeah, I think people sometimes like psych themselves out and think that it's like hard. And then again, what I'd look for is like, ideally, even if the CEO that you're working with isn't like somebody who's like a renowned CEO, ideally, is it somebody who has a Keith or a Max or something like that on his board, right? And so once you start to remove yourself from 1 degree, there's actually a wide variety of opportunities that are sort of 1 degree removed from those people, right? Like it might be hard to work directly for Keith, but is it hard to work for one of the founders that Keith mentors? No, not that hard. Think about it. Keith mentors like 20 plus different founders. Those people like on average have companies that are 100, 150 employees. So we're talking about like the number of people that Keith like quote unquote mentors is actually much closer to basically like 2000, not 20.
That's amazing. Yeah, I feel like maybe people don't put enough emphasis on mentors. And if so, maybe they're not getting the right mentors for their needs.
I think part of it is also thinking through like what would be the ideal mentors for the problems that you want to like, solve, right? Like what do you want to go do? Like I'm talking about like mentors that are particular to like startups and founding a company, but there are mentors across a wide variety of disciplines. Like if you just want to be like, hey, you're like, I don't want to be a startup or a founder. I just want to be like a VP of product. Think through, okay, which are the companies that have like the best sort of product sense, right? Like the Squares, the Figmas, the Robinhoods of the world that clearly have really beautiful, well-designed products. And then go find those people and see who they've worked at, right? Like you can sort of go through this, process of finding the ideal mentor across a wide variety of disciplines. And so I think it's like if I were to like be a fresh grad again, it's like start to think through, okay, what is the thing that I want to do in 10 years? And for me it was like I want to start a space company. I was like, okay, well then I need to learn both about space, I need to learn about starting companies, and I need to learn about fundraising because space is like particularly capital intensive. And then basically like broke those down. And for sure some of the stuff I wasn't like perfectly thinking out like 10 years ago, but if you do come into it with that sort of plan, you'll be much more likely to be successful if you really break it down and think about, okay, who would be the best mentor in the world, and then how do I, if not be mentored by them, get close to them or the people that they actually mentor.
Of course. And for a lot of people, maybe it's still in school. How do they go about finding that focus? Say there's just like all these new things that they're learning and they don't know that, hey, in 10 years, I want to go into space. What are some ways that they could kind of narrow down what they're interested in, that they could figure out, yeah, this is the route I'm taking. And now once I figure that out, I could plan that path.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is why, like, breadth early on in a career is really important as well. Like, I love when people basically do like an internship almost every single summer and they do a wide variety of different types of internships. Maybe you do one that's like in politics, one in space, one in tech, one in finance. And I think it's great to make sure to do that early on. If you still feel like you don't have a sense of what you want to do, a lot of really successful people in Silicon Valley have had sort of early like consulting stints in their career where they just do 2 years at a Bain, McKinsey, et cetera. Like, don't stay there forever and get too much on like the ladder of these like super boring companies. But like working at a Bain is like a great way where if you explicitly asked to like go through the program and rotate, you can get exposure to everything from healthcare to space to finance, and it's a great way to like get exposed. And like honestly, the Bains and McKinsey of the world are they're not easy to get into, but it's not impossible as like a fresh grad motivated person to basically get into those. Or again, you can go to the next tier of consultancies. And so what I'd say is if you don't feel like you know what to do, don't just like dive into a career where you're set on a path that like you're really gonna have to stick with it for an extended period of time. Like if you're not sure about like wanting to become a doctor, don't get into medical school. If you're not sure that you want to be like a software engineer, don't go down the path of just being a software engineer. Instead, like make sure to try out basically a wide variety of roles, industries, etc. And then the way that I would choose what you want to do in the long term is like do what just feels easiest and what you feel like you're naturally good at. Like I always thought I was like, oh, I have to be the founder, I have to be the CEO. And obviously, lo and behold, I'm in this position where I'm not a founder. I am a founder, but I'm not the CEO. And what I came to realize is like, I just find investing and not being the CEO comes much more naturally to me than being a CEO. And I'm much better at this part of it. And so I'm like, okay, great. I'm going to do these things that I'm naturally better at. Because I tend to think you should like lean into your strengths as opposed to try to shore up your weaknesses. And so I leaned into my strength of, I think I'm a better investor. And so I'm just going to keep doing that rather than try to force myself to be, a CEO. And so, yeah, that's why I think the breadth is important, is because you'll end up stumbling across something that maybe you didn't think that you'd be particularly good at, but all of a sudden, like you're in the top 1% at, and you don't even feel like you really have to try that hard. Those are then you start to think about, okay, how do I then base my whole career on this particular skill set and really focusing on this?
I don't know about you, but that interview was amazing. Delian gave so much great advice for starting your own company and for what to do early on in your tech career. I know that I'm definitely going to take some of that advice with me from here forward. So if that helped you at all, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below, and we'll see you next time.